Hanju didn't have to wait long before an outer sect warden arrived. He was also at the 9th level of the Qi refinement realm. I'm an outer sect warden of the Jade Pure sect, Yan Luo. Brother Han, can you let me do a quick check? Fiendish cultivators occasionally tried to infiltrate the Jade Pure sect in the past few years, the outer sect warden said politely, cupping his hands. Hanju didn't have anything on him and wasn't afraid of a check. He raised his hands. Yan Luo began to feel around. Can you show your spiritual energy? Yan Luo asked. Hanju could understand. It was to check if he was a fiendish cultivator. He immediately raised his right hand, wielding his finger like a sword and pointing towards the cliff at the side. Swish! A beam of spirit chi shot out from his index finger, piercing into the rocks. Yan Luo's eyes lit up. What kind of spell is this? He didn't ask, but he could feel that Hanju wasn't a fiendish cultivator. No problem, follow me. I'll bring you to the outer sect for registration. From now on, you're an outer sect disciple of the Jade Pure sect. Yan Luo smiled. Then, he led Hanju into the valley. As Hanju walked, he asked, how many outer sect disciples are there? What are the conditions to enter the inner sect? There are more than 2,000 disciples in the outer section. Only those who have reached foundation establishment can enter the inner section. However, foundation establishment is very difficult. Every 3 years, the sect will hold a sect competition. The top 3 will all receive foundation establishment pills. Foundation establishment pills can help a 9th layer Qi refinement realm cultivator break through to the foundation establishment realm. Are there many inner sect disciples? I'm not sure about that. The Jade Pure sect's inner sect is located in a small world. We have no idea what's happening inside. It seems like Jade Pure sect is very powerful. Of course. The Jade Pure sect is the most prestigious and established cultivation sect in the Great Yin. Does the Jade Pure sect have places to cultivate with lightning and fire spiritual qi? There aren't any in the outer sect, but there might be in the inner section. If you have a thunder cultivation potential, you can appeal to the Elder Hall. Perhaps they can make an exception and allow you to enter the inner section. Having rare cultivation potentials like this is normally enough for the sect to especially nurture you. Yan Luo was secretly surprised. Could it be that this guy also had a thunder cultivation potential? Hanju's eyes brightened as he asked, as long as I have a thunder cultivation potential? Yan Luo nodded. Brother Yang, can you nominate me? If I can enter the inner sect, I will never forget your kindness, Hanju said in a low voice. He raised his right hand and sparks crackled in his palm. Yan Luo's pupils contracted. Yan Luo laughed. Since you're already calling me brother, I naturally have to help you with this matter. I'll make an exception and explain this to the Elder Hall. Thank you, Brother Yang. I'm very grateful. Sure. Yan Luo had been stuck in the 9th level of the Qi refinement realm for 20 years. It was very difficult for him to make any more breakthroughs in his cultivation. The only thing he could do was to form connections. Soon, Hanju arrived at the outer sect's buildings. Most of the buildings were very similar to Elder Iron's buildings and looked antique. There were also many disciples on the streets. Other than cultivators, there were also mortals. The Elder Hall was located in the center of the valley. It had 4 floors, and the entire place was filled with a strange fragrance. Hanju followed Yang Luo in. Yang Luo walked to the counter and said, a 9th level Qi refinement realm cultivator wants to join our Jade Pure sect. The first floor wasn't big, and there was only an old man at the counter. The old man glanced at Hanju, causing him to uncontrollably tense up. He couldn't tell the old man's cultivation level. Could he be a foundation establishment realm cultivator? The old man responded and turned around to take a small rectangular wooden block from the wooden cabinet behind him. Yang Luo asked in a low voice, is the first elder here? This person has a thunder cultivation potential and wants to enter the inner court. Thunder cultivation potential? The old man looked at Hanju in surprise. He waved his hand. Hanju immediately walked up to the old man. At the same time, he made the system only reveal his thunder, fire, and wind cultivation potentials. Triple cultivation potential. The old man was shocked. Triple cultivation potential. Yang Luo wasn't surprised. Instead, he looked slightly envious. Register yourself first. You will be an outer sect disciple for the time being. When the first elder returns, I will tell him about this matter, the old man said in a low voice. Hanju started the registration. After that, Hanju received the sect pass, a storage bag, a jade pure sect Taoist robe, 100 low-grade spirit stones, and a bottle of qi condensation pills. Yang Luo personally arranged for him to stay in a wooden house not far from his. All right, Brother Han, you should rest first. Someone will inform you when there's news. I still have things to do. Yang Luo smiled. Hanju cupped his fists and watched him leave. Yang Luo's attitude made him feel very real. It was different from what was written in novels. Even if Yang Luo wanted to form a good relationship with him, he wouldn't deliberately try to please him. They were all cultivators. He wasn't going to be a simp just because Hanju had better potential. Hanju closed the door and started to cultivate. He could finally cultivate without any worries. Something surprising happened again. He could actually sense fire spiritual qi here. Hanju decided to first cultivate his fire cultivation potential to the 9th level of the qi refinement realm. Generally speaking, cultivators would only choose one technique to cultivate. Most cultivation techniques only had a single elemental attribute. Very few people would cultivate with 6 elemental attributes like Hanju. Hanju's cultivation potential was top-notch and he didn't feel tired at all. He enjoyed the feeling of becoming stronger. More accurately, it was the feeling of his lifespan increasing. When Hanju saw the attributes panel, his first thought was to live forever. He didn't want fame or fortune. He didn't want to marry a beauty. He only wanted to live for very long. He didn't want to suffer from a terminal disease and die at a young age again. With my cultivation potential, I don't need to take risks and seek opportunities. I need to cultivate diligently and never cause trouble. If I can avoid provoking my enemies, then I shouldn't provoke them unless they want to kill me. Hanju thought silently. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. Hanju's fire cultivation had reached the 4th level of the qi refinement realm. The outer sect first elder finally returned, and Yang Luo personally came to inform him. Hanju packed up his things, tied the storage bag on his waist, and followed him to the elder hall. Initially, the elder hall had already forgotten about this matter. I happened to pass by your door and noticed that you were still cultivating, so I suddenly remembered it. I'm sure the first elder would like a diligent cultivator like you. Yang Luo smiled. His tone was full of admiration. Hanju didn't open his door for half a year. If not for the spiritual qi fluctuation inside, others would have thought that it was an empty room. Elder Hall. Hanju met the first elder. The first elder was plump and resembled Maitreya Buddha. He had a smile on his face and his eyes curved into 2 lines. He sized up Hanju and said with satisfaction, his temperament is comparable to inner sect disciples and almost equivalent to an elite disciple. The jade pure sect robe was white with blue stripes. After Hanju wore it, his charm was completely unleashed. He didn't look like a servant at all. Many female cultivators peeped at him on the way here. I cannot be compared to the elite disciples, Hanju said humbly. The Grand Elder smiled and said, let's go. Follow me to the inner section. If you want to join the inner sect, you have to find a master. There are 18 peaks and 18 missionary elders in the inner section. If anyone is fond of you, you can directly become an inner sect disciple. If not, you can only participate in the outer sect competition and strive to reach foundation establishment as soon as possible. I understand. The 2 of them then left the elder hall. What kind of training style do you prefer, the first elder suddenly asked. The various peaks have different cultures because of the different personalities of the coaching elders. Some are competitive, some are low-key, and some are out on missions all year round. Hanju replied, I'm a low-profile cultivator. I don't like crowds and I don't like being high-profile. The first elder revealed a strange smile and said, then, I'll bring you to the Jade Serene Peak first. At this moment, the teleportation formation was activated and a strong light burst out, causing Hanju to close his eyes. About 3 seconds passed. Hanju opened his eyes, and what he saw was a mountain peak that reached into the clouds. The sea of clouds filled his vision, and he felt as if he were standing on a cloud. Under his feet was the teleportation formation, and in front of him was a stone step that led to the city. The city was located on a lower peak compared to the surrounding 18 mountain peaks. However, when Hanju looked down from the teleportation formation, it was like a 10,000-foot high cliff. Due to the clouds and mist, he couldn't see the ground. The city on the lower peak was very big. Many cultivators could be seen flying with their swords in the sky. There were even various kinds of ferocious birds. That's the inner sect of the Jade Pure sect. You can do missions and collect your salary here. You can also trade inside. The first elder introduced the inner sect with a proud tone. Hanju was stunned. He had thought that the Jade Pure sect was a small sect like in the cultivation dramas. He didn't expect it to be so big. He thought he had arrived at an immortal world. He had truly underestimated the strength of the Jade Pure sect. After all, he had been staying in the herb garden for the past 20 years, and his activity was limited to a radius of 2 kilometers. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call him a caged bird. The first elder waved his hand. Hanju felt something lifting him and almost fell. He looked down and saw a huge gourd under his feet. Stand firm. If you fall, you'll die even if you're at the 9th level of the Chi refinement realm. The first elder laughed heartily. Hanju quickly covered the bottom of his feet with spiritual force to stick himself to the gourd's surface. The huge gourd carried them towards one of the taller peaks. The other huge peaks had disciples traveling in and out, and only this one seemed inactive. The coaching elder of Jade Serene Peak is Fairy Shixian. Her cultivation level is unfathomable. She likes to cultivate in seclusion, with peace and silence. Therefore, Jade Serene Peak is not lively. In addition, she doesn't allow her disciples to develop feelings for each other and become companions. Therefore, there are very few disciples. The disciples who stay on Jade Serene Peak are basically all ascetics, the great elder said with a smile. Hanju raised his eyebrows and said, really? That's great. He was afraid of female cultivators pestering him. After all, his charm was unparalleled. The first elder shook his head and laughed. Soon, they arrived at the palace complex of the Jade Serene Peak and flew straight to the main hall. His mouth moved slightly as the first elder stood in front of the door. He was probably using a voice transmission technique. The front door opened. The first elder led Hanju in. The hall was dark. As they walked in, the oil lamps on both sides lit up. Hanju's gaze landed on the 2 figures meditating in front. 2 female cultivators. One of the female cultivators wore a blue robe and had a graceful bearing. Her appearance could be described as devastatingly beautiful. She was probably Fairy Shixian. The female cultivator behind her should be a disciple. Her temperament and appearance were quite different, but she was still a beauty. Fairy Shixian opened her eyes and looked at Hanju. As the first elder approached, he smiled and said, this child's name is Hanju. He's an itinerant cultivator with a triple cultivation potential and also possesses a rare thunder cultivation potential. On the way here, I asked and found out that he also likes quiet and peaceful training grounds. He doesn't want to be too high profile. Hanju bowed.
Chang Yuer has developed a favorable impression of you. Current favorability, 2 stars.
2 stars just like that? How shallow. Hanju complained in his head and became nervous. Jade Serene Peak is not living up to its name. Are the female disciples also desperate? Fairy Shishan opened her mouth and warned, if you join my peak, I will not treat you any better than others. Everything will depend on you. In terms of cultivation, I won't neglect to teach you. But if you slack off, I will chase you out of the peak. Hanju immediately promised, as long as there are no instructions, I can enter seclusion for 100 years and never leave my house.
Fairy Shixian has a favorable impression of you. Current favorability, 1 star. Chang Yuer's favorability towards you has decreased. Current favorability, 1 star.
Lines of words appeared in front of Hanju. He couldn't help but look down on Chang Yuer. Are you so desperate for love? This is a land of cultivation. Do you know any spells? Attack me. Let me see your ability, Fairy Shishan asked. Hanju nodded and decided to go all out. This Jade Serene Peak suited him too well. Hanju channeled the spiritual power in his body and pointed his right hand at Fairy Shishan. Sword chi burst forth from his 5 fingers, condensing into a palm-sized sword chi that shot towards Fairy Shishan like lightning. Just as it was about to touch Fairy Shishan, the sword chi dissipated into thin air. Fairy Shishan's beautiful hair began to flutter. Hanju looked at the notification and waited for Fairy Shishan to speak. Fairy Shishan asked, is this the only move you know? Yes. Hanju was very honest. He didn't want to pretend to be better. This sword technique is not bad. Alright, you may stay at the Jade Serene Peak. Fairy Shishan nodded slightly. The Grand Elder laughed. I shouldn't disturb you anymore, then. Fairy Shishan stared at Hanju and said, aren't you going to kneel and acknowledge me as your master? Hanju came back to his senses and immediately knelt. Disciple Hanju greets master. Long live master. Fairy Shishan couldn't help but laugh. Do you think I'm an empress? Hanju didn't look up. Fairy Shishan thought to herself, this child carries himself well. His temperament is also not bad. She took out a token from her sleeve and handed it to Chang Yuer. Bring your junior to the inner sect to register and arrange a cave abode for him. Yes, master. Chang Yuer carefully stood up. Hanju stood up and bowed, then left with Chang Yuer. Just as they walked out of the palace, the door closed behind them. Junior Han, my name is Chang Yuer. From now on, you can call me Senior Chang. You're a newcomer, so if there's anything you don't understand, feel free to ask me. Chang Yuer smiled and met Hanju's gaze. She didn't feel shy and stared straight at him. Hanju lowered his head slightly and said, thank you, Senior Chang. I wouldn't dare to trouble you, but if you need a helping hand, you can tell me at any time. You're such a nice person. He's more handsome than the other male seniors and juniors. This was the first time Chang Yuer had met such a handsome man, and his attitude and personality made him very comfortable to interact with. She swore to herself that she must protect Junior Han and not let him be bullied. The two of them went all the way to the edge of the cliff, chattering and laughing all along. Chang Yuer took out her flying sword and let Hanju stand behind her, hugging her waist. Hanju hesitated. Other than you, the other male juniors don't have a chance to hug me by my waist. Chang Yuer snorted. But in fact, Hanju was the first male junior she had met. In the entire Jade Serene Peak, only Hanju was her junior. It had been years since Jade Serene Peak had a new disciple. 2 hours later. Chang Yuer brought Hanju to a cave entrance and said, inside is your cave abode. My cave abode is right beside it. You can cultivate in peace. South close? Hanju looked in the direction she pointed. The entrance of her cave was 100 meters away. Hanju sighed in his head, but he still thanked Chang Yuer. The two bid farewell. After entering the cave, Hanju saw a knob on the wall of the cave. After twisting it, a stone door closed at the entrance of the cave. Immediately after, the cave lit up. He walked towards the end of the tunnel. The cave was about 100 square meters. There was a bed, a table, and a wooden cabinet. He was treated well. Hanju sat on the bed and took out the newly obtained inner sect storage bag. The inner sect storage bag was 10 times larger than the outer sect storage bag. It had a space of 100 cubic meters. He obtained Jade Serene Peak's Taoist robe, a flying sword technique manual, Jade Serene Peak's token, 100 middle-grade spirit stones, and a bottle of chi condensation pills. Spirit stones could be used for cultivation or currency. He immediately retrieved the 1000 superior grade spirit stones from his attribute panel and placed them into his storage bag. This amount of spirit stones was enough to make Hanju rich. The providence of being the descendant of an immortal emperor was indeed amazing. He was given 1000 superior grade spirit stones from the start. Hanju opened his characteristic panel and checked his interpersonal relationships.
Chang Yuer, second stage foundation establishment realm. She treats you as her younger brother. Current favorability, 2 stars. Fairy Shixian, third level of the nascent soul realm. Your master admires your temperament. Current favorability, 1 star.
Favorability didn't mean romantic affection. He was thinking too highly of himself. However, he was very surprised by Fairy Shixian's cultivation. She was a nascent soul realm cultivator. The outer sect's first elder was only at the foundation establishment realm. The chi refinement, the foundation establishment, the golden core, and the nascent soul realms were all the realms that he was aware of so far. In other words, Fairy Shixian was the strongest cultivator he had encountered so far. Not bad, not bad. Hanju thought happily. He packed up his things and started reading the flying sword technique manual. He had to master the flying sword technique. Otherwise, he would have to hug onto his senior's slim waist whenever he needed to go down the mountain. His top-notch sword technique talent allowed him to master the flying sword technique in an hour.
You have successfully become an inner disciple of the Jade Pure sect and started your first cultivation after entering the sect. You can choose the following development path. Earn reputation points and lead the Jade Serene Peak to become the strongest peak. You can obtain a piece of unparalleled equipment but offend Fairy Shixian. Keep a low profile and cultivate. If you obtain Fairy Shixian's recognition, you can obtain a movement technique manual.
Hanju took a look and facepalmed. What the hell? Leading Jade Serene Peak to become the strongest peak would instead offend Fairy Shixian? His master was very strange. Is she a fiendish cultivator spy? Hanju shook his head and smiled, silently choosing the second option. He wasn't interested in unparalleled equipment. All he wanted was to cultivate diligently. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Hanju successfully cultivated his fire cultivation potential to the 9th level of the Chi refinement realm. All that was left was the Thunder Spirit Chi. However, he couldn't capture any Thunder Spiritual Chi on the Jade Serene Peak. Hanju was distressed and decided to pay a visit to his master. He immediately got up and walked out of the cave abode. He executed the flying sword technique and quickly flew to the entrance of Jade Serene Hall. He knelt in front of the door and said, "Master, I have something to ask of you." He didn't raise his voice. He was sure that Fairy Shixian could hear him. Before long, the door opened. Hanju walked into the hall at a medium pace. He walked up to Fairy Shixian and knelt, saying, "I have cultivated my wind cultivation potential and fire cultivation to the 9th level of the Chi refinement realm. I'm only lacking the Thunder Spirit Chi before I can proceed to Foundation Establishment. Master, please tell me where I can find Thunder Spirit Chi." Fairy Shixian opened her eyes and frowned. "You want to cultivate all 3 types of spiritual power?" "Not 3, I'm cultivating 6 elements." "Yes, Master," Hanju replied respectfully. Fairy Shixian said softly, "This isn't an easy path. The heavenly tribulation you encounter will also be stronger than others. You can cultivate 1 type of spiritual chi first. After you reach the golden core realm, it won't be too late to cultivate with the other spirit chi. I want to continue like this. Although it's difficult, I believe that with my will, I can succeed. I'm willing to spend all my time on cultivation, Hanju replied. Fairy Shixien didn't reject him directly, which meant there was still a chance. Fairy Shixien stared at him and said, the inner sect has a teleportation formation that leads to the Thunder spiritual pool. However, one needs 10 mid-grade spirit stones to stay in the Thunder spiritual pool for a day. Hanju said in surprise, thank you for your guidance, Master. I'm going there immediately. Fairy Shixien smiled before closing her eyes and continuing to cultivate. 10 minutes later, Hanju found the Thunder spiritual pool. Entering the pavilion, he saw a teleportation formation in the inner courtyard. He took out 100 superior grade spirit stones. He was going to stay there for 3 years. If he left early, he could ask for a refund for the remaining time. The Jade Pure sect would never cheat their own disciples. When he opened his eyes again, Hanju appeared at a pool filled with hot air. Visibility was poor. The thunderclouds were very low, and he felt that he could reach out and touch them. Apart from him, another cultivator was already meditating nearby. Don't wander around in the Thunder spiritual pool. You can only cultivate by the pool. If you don't obey the rules and get killed by lightning, you deserve it. A cold snort came from behind. Hanju turned his head and saw that it was a huge tree. Its main trunk had a human face filled with sarcasm. A tree spirit. Hanju nodded at it and then walked to the side to meditate. The Thunder spiritual pool quickly fell into silence, and only the sound of thunder could be heard. Hanju was pleasantly surprised to find a lot of Thunder spiritual chi here, which made his progress cultivating his Thunder spirit energy much faster than when he had cultivated the other spirit energies. Awesome! Hanju was extremely excited. In just a short year, Hanju had successfully cultivated his Thunder cultivation potential to the 9th level of the Chi refinement realm. He didn't leave but prepared to enter Foundation establishment. Hanju had top-tier cultivation potential. The first level of the 6 paths of reincarnation technique taught him a method to avoid heavenly tribulation. It was a very hardline approach. He would absorb the heavenly tribulation. The 6 paths of reincarnation would absorb the lightning from the heavenly tribulation and convert it into Thunder spirit energy, helping him further his cultivation. The cultivator nearby also opened his eyes. The lightning in the Thunder spiritual pool began to gather towards Hanju. Is he trying to enter Foundation establishment? The cultivator's face twitched. He silently distanced himself from Hanju, afraid that he would be struck by the heavenly tribulation. An hour later, streaks of lightning interweaved above Hanju's head like dragons and snakes. The strange thing was that these lightning bolts disappeared the moment they touched him. They didn't cause him any harm. The tree spirit and the cultivator frowned. What kind of cultivation technique is he using? It can counter the tribulation like this. Although they were surprised, they didn't disturb him. Disrupting others during their tribulation transcendence was a big taboo in the cultivation world. It was immoral. Relying on his exceptional cultivation potential and an unparalleled cultivation technique, Hanju's breakthrough to Foundation establishment was extremely smooth. There were no surprises or danger. 3 days later, he successfully established his foundation and reached the first level of the Foundation establishment realm.